I'm Vicky Daddo from the Latrobe City Libraries, and I'm very excited that we're bringing this event today with Patricia Wolfe and Claire Halliday. Patricia's going to be talking about her novel Opal, and potentially some other exciting news. So as I've just explained, if you can just keep your microphones on mute and your videos off. There is a chat function, and if you want to ask a question, you can drop a question in the chat at any time. And we will read them out at the end. So about 7:15, Claire will just ask if there's any questions and we'll read those out. So have a think about what you might want to ask during the chat. And just to remind people that events like these are brought to you by Miley, the Latrobe City Libraries and East Gippsland Libraries. And we love you to become library members, because the more members we have, the more events that we put on. So if you're not a member, please sign up the next time you're in. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today, and would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Patricia Wolfe has been a journalist for more than 15 years. She grew up in outback Australia in a mining town called Mount Isa in far northwest. She loves the rugged beauty, indigo sky and wide horizons of the outback, but left Australia after university to travel the world and became a journalist. She now lives in Berlin, Germany, but the outback always calls her home. And talking to Patricia today is Claire Halliday, who started her professional writing career as a regular freelancer to the Sunday Age and a diverse range of other women's and men's lifestyle magazines more than 25 years ago. Since then, she has written 5 adult non-fiction titles of her own and dozens of fiction and non-fiction titles for a children's educational publisher, as well as ghostwriting for others. She's a copywriter, creating content for leading brands and businesses. So welcome to Patricia and Claire, and I'll hand over now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicky, and thanks to the collaboration of libraries that you mentioned that's made this possible, and welcome, Patricia.
Thank you for having me. It's super nice to be here. I can tell that I'm in the mid-daylight in midsummer. You guys are in cold,
yeah,
chilly.
Got my jumper on because I knew I had to turn the ducted heating off so it wouldn't make a noise. So I'm sitting here rugged up.
Rugged up, good.
Which brings me to one of the first things I'd like to talk about, because as Vicky mentioned in your bio, you did grow up in outback Queensland, yet here you are beaming your way to us from Berlin. And so with somebody who has such a strong sense of place, I'm surrounded by your books here, and they all have these, vast, very iconic Australian landscapes on the cover. Yet, like I said, you're in urban Berlin. So tell me how that happened. And then I want to ask you about, how you connect with that sense of place still while you're writing these Australian stories while you're in Europe.
Well, so how it happened is that when I left uni, I went to London. I worked there as a journalist, and one thing led to another, and the days turned into months, turned into years. And I've been for quite a long time now living in Europe, in London, in Lisbon and Madrid, and now in Berlin, where I've been working as a journalist. But in 2019, I came back to Australia. I took a sabbatical, and that's when I spent 2.5 months on the road in far northwest Queensland. I mean, I come back to Australia all the time over this period because my family live in Australia. But this time I took a much more extended trip, and I made this long road trip back to where I grew up in Mount Isa, all the way through outback Queensland, from Brisbane and around. And that's when Outback came to me. And since I've been writing the series, actually, I've been spending 3 to 4 months a year back in Australia, because I actually find I can't write the books without being on the ground. Because as you say, place is really quite important in the series. And I really feel like I need to see it and smell it and hear it and taste it, not just try and imagine it. It makes such a difference. So I always come back and do at least 1 month research trip at minimum. But last year I was there for 4 months, and I will be back again next summer. I basically live a permanent summer. Summer here, summer with you guys. So yeah, that's how that works. But I think it would be very difficult to do it exclusively from Europe for me anyway.
Well, with our cold snap we're having in Victoria, at least at the moment, I think you're onto a good idea there.
Onto a winner.
So you mentioned Outback, and obviously we've talked about how strong that sense of place is, how important it is. It's almost like a character in the book, really. Yeah. But let's talk about the people characters, because it's clear that growing up where you did, the outback had sort of touched your heart and your spirit and is, you know, etched in your mind, and why it's important for you to tell its story in the books. But I want to know about the genesis of the characters and where they came from, because you've written a series, and I presume at the start you had plans that it might be a series.
Well, actually, I mean, I wrote the first book not really thinking. I didn't know if I'd have a publisher. I hadn't written any books before. I just, it came to me, this particular road trip. I think what's interesting is I've tried to write books in the past and never finished them and never quite got the voice, never quite got the character. And there's something about Outback Queensland that I understand, like you said, so well, the context and the depth and the people and everything, that when I was there, it suddenly became possible to write, you know, possible to finish the book, possible to hear the voice of Lucas really clearly in my head. And I always say it because it's really how it felt. I was driving these long straight roads, you know, when you drive for miles and there's no one and nothing, just grass and cattle and occasional trucks. And it felt like he was sitting beside me in the car. And he was a real living person telling me his story. He lived with his grandma, why he was back. This is the Outback story. What, you know, where he came from. And it was really a very natural genesis, but I think, like you say, it came because of the context I have of knowing so he's a sort of amalgam of all the country guys I know, you know, that I grew up with and I still know. So.
Well, okay, so you're saying you didn't go into it knowing it was going to be a series, but I always get this sense about characters like Lucas, where they do go on to be, you know, the heroes in a series, that I always thought you'd go into it differently at the start, because you don't want to, you know, there's a whole sort of strategy, I guess, when you're writing a series. You're not giving everything away. The character's got to experience growth. There's got to be little snippets of him that we, you know, explore in other books. So once you figured out that it would be a series, or there would at least be a second book, did that immediately change how you started portraying him and what you were going to give away and what you were going to hold on to? Because we have to keep finding out more little nuances about him
little
in
nuggets.
each book.
I mean, he grows and changes over the years anyway. He develops as a person in my, you know, in his life, in my mind, however you want to put that. I had already finished Outback and had an agent, and then the publisher said, could you envisage this as a series, before I thought it through. And actually I made some, what I now consider mistakes, because I didn't consider it a series. For example, Grandma, she's such a lovely character in the first book, his grandma, who he has this really strong bond with. And if I'd known it was a series, I probably, sorry, it's more spoiler. She dies, but she's sick the whole way through. It's not a big spoiler. I probably wouldn't have let her die. She was such a good foil for him, you know, this family connection. So I think that I did make some mistakes because I didn't have this clear in my mind. Barbara too, perhaps, would have made her not German, given a more longer term ability for them to connect. But then I had to work with what I'd done, and that's how. So yeah, I mean, I think there were things, for example, the crime element of Markovich and stuff, which lent itself to being developed, and also Barbara as a person that's been developed. So there were opportunities there, but unfortunately, I have to own up to this being luck more than skill.
Well, we are going to focus on Opal for a bit now, and it is book 3. But for you, this is kind of old news, because you are doing this series, you're always on to the next one. So this
that's right.
Came out book 4 over a year ago. You wrote it probably nearly 2 years ago.
That's right. I was working on it in September and October, and then right through to March, April of 2 years ago, September, October, until March, April last year. And it was published, I guess, in August or sort of September last year. I'm now the 4th book is coming out in Australia in book form in August, and it's out already digitally, and I'm starting work on the 5th. So that's how, Opal is a little bit, so I have to get my head back around into Opal.
So when you do go back to it, is it like flipping through an old family photo album or something, where you kind of have to see the picture to remind yourself? Because in your mind, like you're saying, characters evolve like people do. And Lucas has moved on in book 4 that you're saying is just out, and you're already, you know, seeing him evolve more in book 5. So what can you tell us about what he's like in book 3 for the people that haven't yet read Opal?
Okay, so in book 3, he is in a little bit of an interim point in his life. In book 2, his career, he got exposed. He always worked in organized crime as an undercover, and that has been taken away from him because of things that happened in book 2. He's now on a desk job. He hates it. so his career is a little bit not working for him, but his sister is visiting from the US, and he's decided to take a holiday, and he's going to show her the outback that he loves. And off they toddle to a town called Kampara, which is a made-up town, where his cousin, because family is actually quite a big deal in this series to him, and helps the series grow, I think. Where his cousin has been working in opal mining, and there's a big flood, they get stuck there, some people die, and Lucas gets caught up in this quite horrible murder investigation, and that his sister's in danger, his cousin's in danger. So that's the sort of summation of opal.
And family is a really strong thing for him too. Was that something that you're sort of drawing on from your own experience, your own connections to family? Why did you decide to make him have such a strong connection with family?
In my experience, I don't have a big extended, I mean, I do have a big extended family. Obviously, I live 20,000 kilometers away, so I'm quite close to them, but not physically close to them. But in my experience in the outback, family and connections and community is still quite a strong thing. People have this, perhaps because we're so isolated, perhaps there's not so many opportunities the community is super important, in every sort of way, emotionally, practically, in every way. So that was one of the reasons. And I was also really keen to have a police detective who wasn't totally messed up. You get a lot of alcoholic divorcees who are not very happy, but which is probably true given the nature of the job. But I just wanted to spend time with a guy who had this strong heart for his family, and who was a good guy, although he has some flaws as well.
So tell me about those flaws, because I'm sorry, just having a cough. Obviously flaws are what make characters so interesting. Nobody can be perfect. How would you describe Lucas's flaws? And like I said, there might be people that haven't read the books, and they're just here to get a taster of who you are. So we won't touch on too many spoilers.
No, I won't. No, sorry. Well, Grandma's in the first book, she's pretty much dying the whole way. It's not sort of a shock, but so let me think. Lucas, he's very independent, perhaps to the point of not really building enough relationships, both personally and professionally, that support him. He keeps Barbara, who he has really strong feelings for, firmly in the friend zone for the whole book and the next one. He hasn't been building very good work relationships with people because he's so fiercely independent. He also is a bit of a rebel. Like, if he thinks something is the right thing to do, he would break an order to go and do it, and that doesn't stand him all that well in his career either, because in the police that isn't really the done thing. You have to do what you're told rather than what you think's right. What else would I say are his flaws? He's very single-minded. He's almost obsessed with work. That's kind of people where you just can't get them to think about anything else. I think that's partly an issue for him too. He doesn't have a lot of balance in his life, particularly not in Outback, but even in Opal. He gets distracted away from his sister, who's come all this way to see him, who he loves, and he wants to get to know better because she's a lot younger than him. But instead, he just gets sucked into work, and it becomes almost a danger to her, his obsession with work.
So were you always interested in writing crime?
Yes, well, I read a lot of crime. I've always read a lot of crime, and so that was part of the attraction. Also, as a journalist, I think crime offers a really interesting way to talk about things that are current, that are actually happening, to look at some situations. For example, in Outback, I was looking at methamphetamine addiction in rural Australia, which has been a big issue. And it's interesting to me how that came about, how the supply lines work, how the whole organized crime element of it works. So I got to write fiction, but also do a little bit of research and find out. And so that has all, and in Paradise is about coercive control, which is another topic that I was interested in. So I like the balance of of writing fiction, but having some, not fact exactly, but some basis in truth, I think crime gives you that opportunity.
So your journalism career would really inform your approach to writing. How do you feel it has impacted the way that you tackle things, and the way that you research, and the way that you really do want to hold on to those factual kind of elements?
Yeah, I think that's it. To begin with, especially, I had to remind myself that that I was making this up, and that I had a little bit of license that you don't really have in journalism. Everything has to be factually checked. But at the same time, it's quite important to me that it's believable, that that it's not that there is factual basis, as you said. And I think the way I research is like that too, that I'll do a lot of background research, and I might not actually use that research in detail, but having it in my head is really important. I think that's also how journalists work. We need a lot of background before we can sum it into a journalistic story, into a news story, for example.
So a lot of fiction writers would struggle, who don't have that journalistic background, would struggle with the research and the facts and you know, just not making stuff up that might seem wildly inaccurate, you know. But I'm wondering, because you come from that journalistic background, is freeing yourself to delve into the creative and just sort of be a bit more wild and not think about, would that really happen? Is that harder for you? How do you sort of tackle the both different sides of yourself and the writing approach?
I think I've definitely gotten better at that over time, especially as I'm spending more time writing fiction now than doing journalism. But in the first book, I found it really, really difficult. And I also found it difficult to give myself space to write and have flights of fancy and be a bit descriptive and get that, because, you know, that's beaten out of you as a journalist. It's all about facts. It's about getting it as succinctly and
concise word counts and
exactly. So at the beginning, I would always have to give myself space to breathe in the writing, and I feel like I'm getting better at that. The books are getting a bit longer and there's a bit more, I mean, there's a balance, isn't there? Because I think one of the good things about a journalist is that when you do write description, you're not flowery with it. You're still, you know, you give it, but you don't. So there's a balance. But I think overall it's been, you know, I wrote every day for nearly 20 years as in my job. And I think that can only help. It's like that 10,000 hours of anything makes you better, right? So, but yes, it was a challenge to shift between the two.
And so have you got any tips for people that might be exploring their own creative writing? Because the fact that you had to sort of consciously give yourself space, I'm wondering what sort of techniques or tools or prompts you maybe utilised to help yourself find that space and really lean into it.
I did a lot of free writing, so that I wasn't actually planning. I mean, some of it did come into the book, but this is how I worked, that I had to give myself space where I was like, this isn't the book, but this is just describe, you know, the outback to yourself. Like, just spend some time, describe Lucas, describe, you know, just really taking it off the page and then because that's where I got the space, because that's also how I operate as a journalist, is I will write much longer notes and then, you know, not sum them, but turn that into a story. For other people, I mean, I think that the challenge really is a balance between giving yourself breathing space and not indulging yourself. And I think that's a really tricky balance, and that a good editor will also help with that.
So I'm wondering, when you come back and you see Australia through the eyes of now, you know, an outsider who lives the majority of your time elsewhere, are you sort of a bemused observer, a keener observer? Does it match your memories of what, you know, your heart tells you Australia was? How do you work through that? Because sometimes we have memories of a country, we leave
absolutely,
and we come back and it's not that country anymore.
I mean, it's a very, very different country to when I left, you know, almost close to 30 years ago now. So, and every time it's different, and I am an outsider, and I have, you know, I'm learning every time when I come back. Oh, this is different. Oh, look at this. And that's why I think one of the reasons I need to spend a good wedge of time on the ground. But one of the things about being a little bit outside is I do think you see what's so special about it more clearly, in a way, because you're not seeing it every single day, you know. So when I come back, it does warm my heart, and I pick on the things that warm my heart, or the things I'm surprised by, and that informs my writing. So, I mean, I'm tossing up really honestly at the moment about whether to come full-time back to Australia or not, for both personal and professional reasons. But I think it's been a help for me to have the bit of the distance from the writing perspective, because it's given me that slight step back to see it and describe it in a way that when I'm fully immersed in it is a bit more, you know, might be a bit more difficult. I mean, I don't know, that's just been my experience.
And do you see Lucas specifically as someone who is a uniquely Australian character? And I'm just wondering what that translates to when your books are published, you know, in other territories outside of Australia, how they respond to it.
I mean, they see it very, very Aussie, I think, especially Lucas. He's a proper, you know, he's an Aussie outback man, even the way he talks and thinks and the laid backness of him. That works pretty well in somewhere like England, which is you know, one of my biggest markets, because they have a strong connection to Australia and some depth of understanding for it. I've been translated into German now for Outback, and I'm curious. It's just come out this year, and I don't know how well it's going. I haven't had any sales figures, but I'm curious to see how they will understand, and also how the language translates. You know, the kind of Aussieisms, the translation of that is very difficult, I think. So I think we haven't really sold in America at all. So that's interesting to me too. So I think it is very, very Australian, and that works in its favour within, you know, in Australia and in places like England, but it could perhaps work against it in some other regions.
Well, I'm definitely not the expert on tourism statistics in Australia, but my understanding was that, I don't know if it's current now, but certainly in pre-COVID, it was German backpackers who are more likely to go to the top end and more likely to go to the Red Centre and more likely to go off the beaten track and do the sort of more wild Australia, whereas other, you know, tourists, Asian tourists and stuff might just stick to the cities. So
I mean,
with that in mind, you would think that the Germans might have a really strong affinity with that, because I've always been curious about that relationship, you know, through their eyes.
I think that's why they bought it, why the publisher here bought it, because there is this kind of curiosity. And as you say, there are a lot of German backpackers, hence in Outback, the victims are German backpackers.
Well, yes, there's that too.
But yeah. But as a mass market, I mean, I think what you're seeing in Australia are a relatively small proportion of Germans, you know. So I'm not sure this as a mass market book how it will. I mean, I'm still waiting to hear. Fingers crossed. It would be great if it did well.
Okay, so you didn't plan it to be a series, but then, you know, by the time it came out, you were thinking of book 2. Then how many did you envisage, or was your publisher just going, just keep it going, Patricia, just keep it going? Or did you have in your mind that it would, you know, come to an end at a particular number?
I sound like I'm really not very much of a planner when I am in my life, actually quite a planner, but no, I didn't. We did first one, when they bought the first one, they said they wanted 3. So up to Opal, we knew. Then once we got to Opal, they asked for 2 more, and I'm working on the 5th at the moment. And they're now talking about whether we will do another 2. So that would take us up to 7. So after that, I mean, it's only perhaps so long that we can keep Lucas. I don't know. Let's see. I'm enjoying it still. People are reading it still. So for the moment, we're going to keep going.
And you imagine, you know, you said at the start that when you first envisaged him, you saw him as this fully formed character that you could really see and get a sense of. You must have developed a really strong relationship with him.
I've got a total crush on him.
So I'm wondering how you come to the end as you get closer with each book, because you'll have to say goodbye to him and presumably move on to maybe another series.
You know, that's interesting. I've never thought about how that would feel, because I'm usually, I know that there's another book coming. But up until now, I've always known there's another book coming. So I'm just thinking about taking him there. Yeah, I'm really close to him. I have a crush on him. And I think that's what I like about writing him, is that he's a nice person fundamentally, and that, you know, I like to spend time with him. It will be weird. It will be weird to leave him. Perhaps we'll take a break, and I don't know. Let's see. I've got 2 more after the one I'm doing now, so that's still 3 years at least. So I'll have to start to prepare myself to break up with him.
So you've talked about Lucas a lot, and we can tell your love for him. But what about, I imagine that might make the writing of him easy because you know him so well. But what about the characters that you introduce along the way, specifically in Opal, that maybe, you know, you're just discovering for the first time? Are they harder for you to write, or is it a nice sort of break to just delve into this completely
new people,
random character? And
so with Opal, before I wrote Opal, I spent a couple of 6 weeks or so up in northwest Queensland in the opal mining towns in Junda and in Winton and places like that. And I met a lot of characters. None of them are actually in the book, but they had so many.
Are you just saying that in case there's illegal?
No, really not. But some of the stories they told me are definitely in the book. And I got so excited at envisaging, because, you know, this whole opal mining is really like adventurers and a little bit crazy dudes, and who want to be out there in the middle of nowhere making their fortune, hoping for their fortune. So I got really excited to put all of these people on page. And I always like writing bad guys, or, you know, because I'm always interested in what makes people, because I think very few people are fundamentally like evil. I don't have this kind of belief, but I think there are situations or needs or desires that can make someone do something really horrendous. And I'm always curious about, how could you, you know, what could, and they're quite interesting to write. But it is nice to add new people into the mix. And I'm working now on that. For example, in in the fourth book, which will be out in a bit late, which is sort of out now on audio and will be out in book form soon. Then I'm in Germany. It's set in Berlin, actually. And so that was really a challenge for me to put German characters in and do that in a believable way. That was actually much harder because I'm not as anywhere near as embedded here as I am in Australia, despite my distance.
Now, we talked about, you know, the way that the outback and or just the place generally is like a character, and it's so visual. So with that visual element that you bring to the writing, did you start the book thinking, oh, I wonder what this would be like to see as a movie? Or is that a thought that's popped up along the way? Because, you know, we love the series and they love turning them into series on television too.
We can only hope. I think I see very visually when I'm writing. It's almost like there is a little film playing in my mind and I'm transcribing that. So it's not that I necessarily thought this would be a film, but I think I have this quite visual imagination that I translate. There are some people who are interested in potentially optioning it for a TV series. So fingers crossed, that would be amazing. But we're at very early stages, and yeah, I don't know if it'll happen or not.
So you can't give anything away? Like, would it start at the beginning, or would it be like focused on one of the particular stories?
Yeah, the idea that they're pitching, so if no one's bought it, you know, in terms of there's no one producing it yet, but would be Outback and Paradise, so 2 series. That would be it.
Well, that's exciting. And
yeah, it's really exciting.
People in the audience tonight who would be keen to hear that. So can you tell us what the next one is? Because you said it's already available digitally.
Digitally, yeah, it's called Nemesis, and it's Lucas is being sent to hunt down Markovich, who's one of the bad guys he's been chasing really all the way through the series, who's left Australia for various reasons, and he comes to Berlin, and this also gives him a chance to reconnect with Barbara, who's this sort of slight love interest he's had in the books for the series. And they find them. He's trying to find Markovich. He's total fish out of water. Doesn't speak the language. Doesn't really understand the criminal codes or the criminal class here at all, or the police for that matter. And she's working a case too, a poisoning case. And so those 2 stories are intertwined in. And it's
So tell us more about Barbara, because you've talked about this crush that you've got on Lucas and the way that you know him so well. I'm just wondering if you find it easier to write male characters, or what was it like to write Barbara by comparison?
She's a lesser character. I mean, she's not lesser. She's not in it as much, so I haven't spent as much time with her. I like female characters too. I'm always curious. The thing with Lucas is he was just so clear to me. So he's kind of a separate. I'm going to set him aside. But the balance between men and women, it's interesting to me to hear their voices, and I sometimes try not to be too. I don't know. Sometimes I start a character as a woman, and then halfway through I decide to turn them into a man because I want to slightly change, not always be this kind of stereotype of what people are. And if you do that, you suddenly get more interesting characters. So it's not weird to write a male character, but I find female characters, I probably understand them fundamentally a bit better, obviously, as a woman. And Barbara, I like a lot, but she's German, so I don't understand some of her, but I have a lot of German friends, and so she's quite different in her thinking. And she's very independent and also very good at her job and close to her family. She'd be a good match for Lucas if they could ever get it together.
And you mentioned the issues that are at the core of a couple of the stories, and I guess that's sort of what gave you that journalistic interest too, to dig into, like, for example, you mentioned the meth crisis or coercive control in the book Paradise. Do you go into these books, almost like thinking, oh, this is an opportunity for me to educate the public, or you don't want to go on your soapbox, but you obviously have issues that are dear to your heart and an opinion. I'm just wondering how you balance that in crime fiction, because it comes up a lot, I guess, in crime fiction, that they are rooted in some issue. It could be family violence or child abuse, and it enables the author to really get to the heart of that issue and look at it from a different perspective at times.
I think that's fundamentally is you get a chance to give a voice to people who maybe don't, like survivors, maybe a better word for it, who maybe don't have such a strong voice or perhaps aren't heard in the same way, not fundamentally, so that you can really explore what impact some of these crimes have on people. And I think that's the thing from writing crime fiction that maybe I've learned the most for myself, is that crime is has such a depth of impact across community, across family, across individuals. And perhaps, you know, I didn't really think about that when I was reading, like, I don't know, a news report about someone being killed. But when you spend more time with all the characters, and perhaps that's what I like about as a writer, not really to try and educate, although I think it'd be great if people think, oh, I didn't know people use method in the outback, for example, but more to portray the broader impact of some of this stuff, not just the, you know, the kind of gory end of it.
Yeah, because crime fiction, I guess, and true crime too, can go, you know, different ways. People can view it from a very sort of sometimes a female lens and a I don't know, a more ethical outlook on it, or sometimes people can just go for the, you know, almost like horror.
Yeah, horror, yeah.
So it was obviously important to you to, like you say, not make Lucas this, you know, stereotypical messed up police officer and have him connected to family. So you're not just trying to tell the cliche stories, you're getting to the depth of it a bit more and the nuance.
Yeah, ideally, hopefully. I mean, that yeah. And also, I'm not really into, you know, sadistic violence. I don't want to write about that. I don't want to spend time with people. I mean, obviously, coercive control is sadistic, but do you know what I mean? Like the bloody gore it's not really my thing. So the books hopefully have some tension and you know, maybe a little bit of fear or a little bit of nerves, but they're not horror. I don't think so.
So for you, the whole self-care aspect of delving into the research when you are sort of, you know, trying to get the right facts and stuff behind you when you're looking at these crime fiction issues, that hasn't really been an issue for you, or your training in journalism has sort of given you that resilience and
that distance and resilience. I mean, actually, it has. Strangely for me, Paradise was the hardest to write for, you know, that for some reason, because of this feeling of it being in your home and, you know, the cohesiveness of it. I do sometimes take breaks and go back into my real world and remind myself that I'm making it all up and it's not true. And I have gained a really big appreciation of how much police in particular shoulder this burden for the rest of society. You know, they carry this terrible knowledge of what it really involves. I'm making it up, I don't carry it, but I can see more and more as I write, you know, this, as I said, that kind of broader impact of crime. So, and yeah. So yeah, it's not always easy, and I do sometimes take breaks and remind myself as it's all in my head. My dad won't read my books anymore because he's so horrified that I could even imagine these things.
That's interesting. And what about the notion of, you know, like sensitivity readers? Like you're doing so much that's rooted in you know, crime solving and police procedures and stuff like that. Do you have somebody on hand who you show it to and go, yeah, no, wouldn't happen. Oh yeah, yeah.
Not so much on the policing side of it. Occasionally I've checked a few things with people, but I kind of, you know, I'm not police, I don't come from that background, and that's where I allow myself the creative license. I mean, I try, you know, I do some research, I don't let them find things that wouldn't be able to, but I'm sure that police who read it go, that would never happen. So, but I give myself creative license on that. But to serve the story, you know, to make it move and keep it pacey.
And so you're on book 5, which is coming out when?
So that will be next year or next winter, your time.
And so
August,
then straight after that, you'll be on to what you're saying could be book 6 and 7. You mentioned at the start that Lucas was quite a bit of a workaholic, was really, you know, committed to his work. You are clearly, I think anyone who writes a series must have a particular level of dedication that not every fiction writer does, because you know, you're compelled to get the next one out. People are waiting they want to see what happens next in the next installment. Does it give you a different approach to your writing work ethic?
I once got a message on Instagram from someone who said, I love the books, write more, write faster. So
and
that's
you're
the
like,
pressure.
I'm writing fast
I'm
enough.
doing the best I can. I do a book a year, which is manageable for me. Actually, I find I have time to take the research trip, to think about it, to write it, and then do the editing. I don't want to do any more, although my publisher would like it faster, believe it or not. So some people do write more. the nice thing about a series is that it propels you into the next book. And I think that's where I have an advantage. You know, if you're writing standalone books each time, you have to come up with the whole universe, the whole concept, and it takes longer, you know, whereas I have a lot of the universe. I come up with the crime and the location, and then the characters, you know, are there. A lot of them are there. So I think it's easier to write more rapidly if you're doing a series, because you're connected in that way.
I interview a lot of writers and they talk differently about, you know, their approach to planning or not planning and letting things happen organically. And some writers, which I always struggle to believe, but they say it's true, you know, are just writing it and they don't know what's going to happen next and the characters are kind of taking over. Where do you sort of sit with that? When you start a book, do you just have, okay, it's going to start here, this big thing's going to happen there, and at the end this will happen there? Or do you have it, you know, completely planned out? Or do you still get surprised by your own characters and your own writing?
I'm definitely don't have it completely planned out, but I have a very roadmap, I would say, of the, as you said, the main things that I would like to happen. But things come up and surprise me in every book, always. But when that happens, it means the writing's going well. That's what I think, because you're so engaged that, you know, they're talking to you and telling you what's happening. And when it's not going so easily and you're having to plot and plan all the time, that's in my experience anyway. In Opal, there's a scene of a fire, and that was never in the plan, but it's quite an important scene. So yeah, it happens. It's nice when it happens. Doesn't happen all the time, unfortunately.
Do you remember anything else specifically in Opal that surprised you in that way, or?
Well, I do, but
Oh, well, then don't do it.
I don't want to do a spoiler.
No,
I don't
trying
want to do a
not to
spoiler.
go to
Well,
spoilers.
let me just say that Blair's role in the book was completely different to what it ended up being. So
Okay.
that really, yeah. Blair is Luke's cousin.
Yeah. Vicky, I'm not sure if there's any questions from the audience, but if there are, we could go to them. A few.
Not yet, so
please,
you carry on.
I can't see any of you, but please ask some questions.
Yeah, and Vicky, you should ask questions too, because you're a big Patricia fan.
I am a Patricia fan, and I was going to say there are a number of particularly female Australian crime writers. I'm thinking Jane Harper, Danuka Mackenzie, Margaret Hickey, yourself. What is it that draws the crime writing? Is it the setting? Is it Australia that makes women writers here want to write crime series? Because they're very good at them.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. I'm not sure. I definitely think that whole Aussie noir is has been having a moment for probably nearly the last 10 years. And I think that part of it is definitely the landscape, because it, like, say, Scandi noir, which offers you this cold, isolated, foresty kind of thing. We have the exact opposite. We're like the hot cousin, right? Where you have the isolation and the heat and the dryness, but it's a fantastic scope. Now, why more women are doing it is a good question. I think there's a statistic that more writers are women, right, in general. I have a feeling that's like 60-40 in favor of women, so maybe that I actually don't know.
And I think the readers are more women too. But
that as well.
I did another talk this week actually with some true crime writers, a panel of 3 true crime writers, and they were true crime podcasters as well. And 2 of them were women. One was a guy. And I would say 90% of the audience was women. And so we asked the question to them about what is it about true crime fans that are mostly women? They're listening to these terrible true life stories, and you'd think they'd barely be able to sleep at night. But one of the true crime writers said that she thought it was because women kind of get a sense of safety from understanding what they fear. So if they absorb themselves in this, you think would be too scary to listen to, it sort of, you know, she says sometimes she feels like it gives them tips about, not that you can protect yourself, of course, in any situation like that, because things unfortunately just happen.
Random, yeah.
But, you know, she said there was an element of that women, you know, wanted to understand it so they could feel maybe a little bit in control of it in some strange way.
And I think, I mean, speaking as a reader rather than a writer, one of the things I like about crime fiction is the knowledge of resolution coming. You know, even though you're like on tenterhooks. You're kind of promised that it will be resolved in some way, and that's not really true in life. And so I think there's something sort of you get, and also you get to think when you read crime fiction. Ooh, could it be him? Could it be her? Why is this happening? And I think all of that's engaging. But whether there are definitely more women. I don't know. Maybe we read more, write more. Who knows?
And so what are you reading at the moment? Because you said that, you know, you were inspired to write crime fiction because you're a big reader of it. Have you got
am a big
recommendations for the crime fiction loving audience that's tuning in tonight?
Well, actually, I'm really strongly in the writing of my next book, and I don't read a lot of crime fiction while I'm writing because I just find it too distracting. Excuse me. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice.
Well, I guess you wouldn't want to think that you might absorb something and not realize you've absorbed it, and then suddenly it ends up on your page.
But one book that I did read just recently, it's about to come out fairly soon. It's called The Vanishing Place by Zoe Rankin. It's set in a New Zealand forest, and I thought it was really good. It's her first book. So I'd recommend that if you can get hold of it, The Vanishing Place. And then other books I've been reading on you know, just general fiction or non-fiction stuff, so just to keep me away from the crime and keep myself in Lucas's world.
Do you do read though while you're writing? So you don't.
I do.
From
one of the best books. I mean, I read two really good books. One is this one, which is by Susanna Clarke. It's not a new book, but it's called Piranesi. It's kind of a fantasy. It's poetic. It won the Women's Prize for Fiction a few years ago. It's an amazing, amazing book. I loved it. And the other one, which I'm just trying to remember, sorry, I'm sitting in my room. So it's called Prophet Song, and it won the Booker in 2023. And it's about an island turning into a dictatorship, basically, and it's terrible and amazing and beautifully written again, but really resonant in today's times, because we can see some of those things that happen in that book happening in real life now. So yeah, I'd recommend both those. It's a bit heavy, the Prophet Song, but good.
Vicky, I think I saw some questions pop up.
Yes, there are. So a question from Christine: how do you find inspiration for the crimes in each of your novels?
Good question. Well, unfortunately, the world supplies all the inspiration I ever need. I read quite a lot of news generally just because of my job, and I read the crime news, and I often find things that are happening, stories that are happening that make me think, oh, that's interesting. I could use elements of that in the next crime. So let me try and think. Well, Paradise, you know, I'd been reading about coercive control, and then I used things like that. So I find my inspiration in real life, sadly, for a lot of even for the weapons and the way people kill each other. And yeah.
And questions from Loza. Did reader feedback lead to Barbara having more of a role in Nemesis? And it's a double header. Were you involved in the selection of the narrator, Adam Fitzgerald, for the audiobooks? Because he's great. And yes, I second that. He is great.
He is amazing. I love Adam. I got the audition tape and I heard it and loved it. I wasn't involved in that. He was the narrator they wanted to use, and I said, yeah, great, because I think he's amazing. So that was my involvement in that. I guess if I hadn't liked him, I could have said no, but he is just the voice, isn't he? He's the perfect voice for it. And the first, yes, I mean, I got a lot of reader feedback about Barbara and about Lucas and Barbara, and when were they ever going to get it on? So that was part of the reason, because I'm not really I'm better with dead bodies than hot heaving bodies. That's my thinking as a writer. But anyway, yes, Nemesis, book 4. Like, you can find out more about Lucas and Barbara.
So, I mean, you research about murder weapons. I'm sure you've done your own research about hot heaving bodies at times, sometimes, haven't you?
Yeah, but it's harder to write. I find it not so easy to write.
Another question, Vicky.
There it is. Do you ever have a hankering to tackle a different fiction genre?
I do, actually. I would really like to try something else, be outside of crime, see how it goes, see how it feels to do that. And hopefully I will.
A rom-com from you or something? Or
yeah, no,
rom-com too far.
Definitely a bridge too far. But at the moment, because I'm doing a book a year in the series, I really don't have the space and also the headspace or the creative space to do anything else. If when the series comes to sort of an end, I would like to try doing something else. So let's see how that goes. I think it will be it will be interesting. It'll be nice to have a completely different voice and completely different approach.
I'm wondering if that character in that whatever genre book that is will have some sort of framed photo of Lucas on their mantelpiece, because you just won't want to let him go. You'll want to prevent him somehow.
I would like to ask on that vein,
sorry,
just if while you're talking about Lucas and thinking back to the narrator question, who would you like to play him if you do get the nod to the
That's what I was just going to say, is that he is so clear in my mind as a character, and I can't see any actors that I know. I mean, also I'm not big in film, but they'll be sending me castings, I suppose. But it would be really interesting to hear, if we were in the room now, I'd be asking everyone to tell me who they thought would be good for Lucas, because I'm also curious to see how other people see him. How do you see him, Vicky? Who would you pick?
I don't know his name, but the actor who plays the lead in the Scrubland series, because he's got that dark curly hair, I just can't think of his name, and he strikes me as that sort of laid back Australian type as well. I think somebody like him would be pretty good.
Yeah.
Maybe people in the audience can drop some names in the chat. We can have
Please, that would be great.
I'm interested in what you said about the reader feedback. I guess a series lends itself to that, I could imagine, more than just a standalone novel. Has the level of that increased, and do the things that readers reach out to you and talk about that they want to happen, or that bothers them that has happened, sort of surprise you or intrigue you?
Yeah, what's interesting actually is that most of the feedback is about things. For example, Barbara, I get a lot of messages about Barbara. I get a lot of messages, especially in the first book, I got a lot of messages about Ginger, who's Walker's dog, and what happened to her. And it was interesting to me because it just shows that the emotional connection you make with people, characters, as a reader, is so important. And as a writer too, I'm always, curious who are people going to connect with in this book? Who are they like? What, other than Lucas, so yeah, mostly it's always been like, why are Lucas and Barbara not together?
Because people love a bit of romance, even amongst the crime.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is why I think it's a shame that Grandma died, because not just romance, people want to root for people. Do you know what I mean? They want to, yeah. I do when I'm reading. So
maybe I also like a sidekick back in book 8, and Grandma can
I need, yeah, that's fine. I like a bit of will they, won't they on the romance. So let's see.
Vicky, are there other questions? Because we're nearly at the end.
There aren't, but I did just Google who plays the character in Scrubland, and his name is Luke Arnold. So that's a bit spooky.
Okay,
cool. There's a link to a similar name
Luke.
There.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, there is a question that just popped up. How do you think AI is influencing crime fiction genre? That's interesting.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, it will be interesting to see how that goes, because theoretically, I suppose I could feed the 3 or 4 books I've written into AI and ask it to write something similar. But I think the problem with AI is that it still relies on what's already been written. It's not really creative as yet. So you would get a lot of repetition, or not repetition necessarily, but very similar style of writing and style of books, I think, if you used AI as the writer. I don't use AI much for anything, but I think we're still a way off for truly creative writing to emerge, because it requires you to have an idea that hasn't been had before, to a large degree, doesn't it? Create a proper, interesting book. So, and I think that's perhaps where AI isn't as strong yet.
I think unfortunately we're getting closer than we think, though, because I was at apologies, I may have told you this story before, Patricia, if I'm repeating myself, but I hang out with a few writer buddies, and we go away a couple of times a year and have a writer's weekend where there may or may not be some wine drunk, and we get talking and stuff. And we were talking about AI. It was probably about 6 or 9 months ago. And somebody had signed a new contract for a work of fiction. And in the contract, embedded in the contract, one of the clauses, of which, as you know, there's many, it was saying something like that they had to absolutely, agree that there was no more than 30% of the book written by AI. And we were like, geez,
What?
2024 and the
30%?
number was like 30%. And we're thinking, when's it going to be 50%? When's it going to be 60%? That was
Oh my
quite
God, that's
shocking to me.
shocking. Yeah, that's shocking. I mean, I would expect it to say that it cannot have any AI
No,
writing
it was
in
actually,
Not
it
that
had
it
a
can only have
percentage.
30%.
It had a
Oh my
percentage.
God.
I'm not going to
Yeah,
name the
well,
publisher or the author or anything, but that we were staggered
wow.
and we thought,
Yeah,
wow,
I'm
that's
staggered.
a
I'm
very
really
slippery
surprised.
slope, and I can see that
Yeah.
changing very quickly.
Oh God. Oh well.
On that
Yeah,
note,
maybe.
there is another question that says, does it bother you that AI may be cannibalizing your content? There was a list that came out, or you could search recently. So Australian authors were asked to search if their works had been used to feed AI, and I think there's a class action that's being considered. Are you impacted by that?
Well, my work was used. I think pretty much most published work was used, and I have my publisher's contract says that if it's used in AI, that that I should be in some way rewarded for that. But I'm more bothered by I don't really want to teach it to take my job. Perhaps that's not fully. I think it's not right that it's taken without anyone discussing it with people, with the authors of the content. So whether it's books or music or anything else, we're heading down this rapid path without really much consultation or discussion about how we want it to work, and for us and for everyone. So I'm frustrated by that, and I'd be interested to see what the class action achieves. I think we're probably closing the stable door after the horse has bolted, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how that goes too. Vicky, I want to make sure we've got any and all audience questions before we finish. So are there any that I've missed?
No more that I can see.
And have you got a last question,
no,
Vicky?
there's just somebody, sorry, there's just one coming. Everyone needs to read E.M. Forster's 1907 story, The Machine Stops. Just as that sounds like an ominous warning that we haven't really come very far in more than 100 years, which is about right for the human race.
Now, Patricia, there might be, I can tell obviously there's some fans of your writing in the audience by the questions that they're asking, but I'm sure there's maybe people in the audience tonight that haven't read any of your stuff and they've come here with curiosity. So what do you want people to take away from your books?
I mean, a love of the Australian outback for sure. This understanding of the country and how it looks and feels and the people who live there. I'd love people to feel more like, wow, what an amazing. So few. I mean, I still think only a small proportion of Australians really spend time out there, and it's my favourite part of Australia. I mean, it's hard to live in, but it's definitely worth visiting. I hope they have fun when they read it and enjoy it. It's not, just and connect maybe with some of the themes that are there, but really, that's it. And I would just to say, thank you so much to Latrobe for having me and inviting me into this great talk, and really join the library if you're not a member. I used to, when I was a kid, I read every library in Mount Isa Library, which every book in Mount Isa Library.
I'm guessing that there might not have been too many there, but I don't.
No, it's a big library.
Oh, okay.
It's a big library. And I read so much. They actually gave me a Saturday job. So everyone else was working in the record shop, so I was in the library. And I love libraries. They're such an amazing resource. You can get everything there. So join.
Including all of your books, yes. In all formats. So that's a great segue. We've just had a thank you for setting your books in the outback. We need so much more celebration of all Australians' ancient and wonderful landscapes. So, yes.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, there's 3 here to start with, and the 4th is about to come out. Thank you so much, Patricia, for
thank you so much for having me.
Insights into your writing practice and your approach to storytelling. Thanks again to the Library Collaboration for making this possible. Thank you to Vicky for chiming in with some questions as a fan, and thanks to everybody who's joined us tonight.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Patricia and Claire. And yes, as they've both said, please read the books, join the libraries, and yes, think about going to the outback to support those towns out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.